Aloha, I'm Marvin, reporter, Chair of Conservation Committee. We usually meet in KL once Wednesday, but this week, because of political forums being held, we changed it to Friday, and we usually meet 5:30, have a potluck gathering here at the KL Community Center, and I invite you to join us in the future. We, from time to time, have special speakers, and other times we come and share what we know about what's happening on the island and try to keep up on environmental concerns. So tonight we have very special guests, and I think that's why most of you are here. Henry Curtis is here from Oahu, and he's done incredible service for us all by keeping up with what's been going on with the utility company, and he's an environmentalist extraordinaire. And so Henry's going to talk for about 20 minutes or so. He had a wonderful presentation last week, which we did videotape, and if people want to get a DVD copy of that, it's possible. But tonight we want to have a chance to ask questions quite a bit also. So, Henry?
Thank you. I had gotten my start in California doing a lot of door-to-door work, going throughout California, Central Valley, everywhere. And I came to Hawaii and got involved with Life of the Land in '94. And I really didn't expect energy to be a major issue. And we got involved in a transmission line fight in 1996. And it was funny because at the time, talking about energy to fellow environmentalists, they were like, energy? Is that actually an environmental issue? And not a lot of people were involved in it. We got involved in the last 6 years of a 31-year fight to oppose a transmission line, which 10,000 people had opposed, which the Green Party and the Republican Party had opposed. Neighborhood boards from rich areas, poor areas, all different races, and we were up against the utility and we beat them. I always felt at that point, though, that the issues would get before the Public Utilities Commission, and at that time we had to pour through their microfiche to understand utility issues. And we found that the PUC did not even keep a book explaining to new commissioners how the PUC operated or what their past decisions were. And you'd look at one decision and it would say, go to this other decision, and that decision would go to another decision. And it was just a humongous problem of trying to understand who they were. So I put about the last 16 years into studying energy issues here. And we've intervened in about 30 regulatory proceedings before the Public Utilities Commission. I want today to break up my talk into sort of 3 parts. One is the Clean Energy Initiative that was passed in 2008 by Hawaiian Electric, and talk about what that is. And then spend a bulk of the time on geothermal, and which I'm sure a lot of you are here for. And then talk about alternative paths forward. Now, the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative was an agreement between Hawaiian Electric and Lingle in 2008. And basically, Lingle wanted something to run on. She wanted to be able to say she did something, and therefore saying that we were moving towards renewable energy was important. Her major goal was, though, that David Murdoch owned Lanai, and David Murdoch was a major Republican donor, and she wanted to give him a reward, and he wanted a wind farm to power Oahu. On the other hand, Hawaiian Electric wanted something also. Hawaiian Electric was seeing that they were worried about high prices and people leaving the grid, and they were concerned that their revenue would go down. So they wanted to have a mechanism that separated their sales from how much they made. So it's called decoupling. And decoupling means that as their sales drop, they can automatically raise their prices so that you pay more per kilowatt, so their revenue stays neutral. And of all entities in the state, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism told the PUC, don't just give them that, require them to move towards renewable energy, and if they succeed, then reward them financially. But the PUC said, no, we should give them their financial reward first, and then allow them to use their money to fight solar. That's why the Helco came out a few years ago and said we're maxing out on solar penetration on different sections of the island. That's because we had already given them their financial reward and they had no incentive to move towards more renewables. One of the other things Hawaiian Electric said is they wanted to do away with net metering. It's part of the Clean Energy Initiative. They want to replace net metering where you have a solar on your roof, you give to the utility, you can take back from the utility, you pay on the net difference. They wanted a different mechanism where the rate they sold you electricity was much greater than the rate you sold them electricity, and they wanted to charge you a fee for doing that. So the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative also had some other fascinating things in it. For example, it said the market should determine greenhouse gas emissions. We don't need the government telling us that. The fact that the volcano is emitting all these toxic gases, that shouldn't interfere with our building fossil fuel power plants in the state. And we should streamline regulations and do away with public involvement. So it was a horrendous agreement that the utility signed, and they signed it with a state entity called the Consumer Advocate, which is supposed to represent you in Public Utility Commission dockets. So I'm always amazed when groups about the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative, because the most amazing thing about the agreement is they said we need clean energy and we won't define it. There's no definition of clean energy in the state, but we're moving towards it. And so the first way they wanted to move forward was chopping down the rainforests of Borneo to grow palm oil, to bring palm oil into the state to burn in power plants to say that they were clean and green. So the other part of the two big things in the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative was wind on Molokai and Lanai, huge wind farms occupying large sections of these islands and bringing them by cable to Oahu. And they didn't really think through what they were proposing, because as they've argued in case after case before the PUC, whenever you have a large power source, you need 3 sets of transmission lines to bring it to the grid. Because if one is down for maintenance and the second one crashes, you need power on the third one. If you look at the earthquake we had here in 2006, it knocked out the Oahu grid. If you have that amount of wind and the wind suddenly drops, it would knock out the grid every time if you relied on just one transmission line to Oahu. So we told the utility, you're saying $1 billion for a cable system from Oahu to Lanai and Molokai based on one cable. It violates your own rules. And after we argued it for about a year, and finally the utility turned around and said, okay, 2 lines. But it's actually 3 lines that are required. And that brings us to geothermal, which is the other part of the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative. And I was thinking about it because I was taking the road down from Keau to Pahoa and seeing on one side of the road these tall wooden poles with 6 lines on them, 2 sets of 3 lines each. And on the other side, 1 set of the big 3 lines. And so you have 3 sets of these triple lines coming in for Puna Geothermal Ventures, 30 megawatt plant. If you have 1,000 megawatts of geothermal, how many lines do you think you're going to need? Leaving the Kalahe power plant is 6 massive sets of triple lines on massive steel poles. So that is what geothermal also brings. It does not bring simply the plant. It brings these massive poles. And the massive poles would have to take the power from the Pahoa area to Kauai, and would have to follow 2 or 3 different routes, which would probably mean ripping out the smaller wooden poles, going on the 3 routes, the northern route, the southern route, and the saddle road, and replacing them with massive steel poles with huge amounts of lines to bring the power to Kauai, to then bring undersea to Oahu. And besides the total ugliness of that, the problem is nobody has ever put in a high voltage transmission line as deep as the water between Hawaii Island and Maui. And no insurance company will insure it. Because if something breaks on the line, you have to be able to pull the line off the bottom of the ocean up to your ship, repair it, and lower it back down. And there's no insurance company in the world willing to insure it. So you have to put in these massive lines from the Big Island to Oahu with no way of fixing them if they broke, which is absurd. And then geothermal, they're talking about 1,000 megawatts. And if you look around the world, who has 1,000 megawatts of geothermal around the world?
The geysers.
The geysers. Good. California has a couple thousand megawatts, about 1,000, 1,100 in the geysers north of San Francisco. Who else? The two other countries that are up there are the Philippines, with the biggest being on Leyte Island, and Indonesia, the largest geothermal being on Java Island. But neither of those are 1,000 megawatts. So you would have the second largest collection of geothermal power plants in the world here in Puna. Now, you picture how large is a geothermal plant. Most plants in the United States are 50 to 130 megawatts. The largest in the world is around 200. So if you're going to have 1,000, you're not going to have one plant having the 1,000. You're going to have 10 or 12 plants in Puna, like PGV, all with these massive transmission lines, bring them in and bring the power to Waihae. So it strikes me as absurd on several levels, because the cable would have to go between Lanai and Molokai, the channel to Oahu. And the channel is the National Whale Sanctuary. And there are no high voltage lines anywhere in a marine sanctuary in the United States. And NOAA, the National Organization, Atmospheric Administration, whatever, deals with regulation within within the whale sanctuary, has pointed out that electromagnetic frequency, EMF, may or may not impact people. A lot of people say it does, a lot of people says it doesn't, but everybody knows it affects marine life. It affects whales, sharks, eels, turtles, and some fish. EMF helps them to locate prey, helps them to find prey that are after them to eat them, to find where they are in the ocean and how to move to different places, and how to talk to each other within their own species. So if you put a high voltage cable, and several of them in the water, that may interfere with the marine life. And therefore NOAA is like, why would you do that? So here you have a federal agency saying we're concerned about the cable coming in. One federal agency saying you should put it on top of the floor. Another saying no, you should bury it in the ocean. Another one saying you shouldn't have it there at all. And then you get to the channel going to the Big Island and nobody will insure it. So who in their right mind would support it? And it gets even a bit more absurd, because there's a company called Sempra. They're a Fortune 200 company. And they're the ones building the wind farm in Ulupalakua Ranch on Maui. And they're also proposing solar at Pearl Harbor. The wind they're proposing at 23 cents a kilowatt hour. The solar at 17 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's cheaper to have solar on Oahu than wind on Maui, and yet you somehow have to get the Maui wind to Oahu. Why would you do it? It appears that it's being pushed by sort of two groups of people. One, those who think they're going to make money on the deal. Well, three groups. One who think they're going to make money on the deal. One who think they're going to get donations from people who are going to make money on the deal. And one from a group of people who think it's never going to happen, but as long as they say they're working towards this, when it fails, they can turn around and say, we tried to bring renewables, it failed, don't look at us. And that, of course, is the utility. because the utility is afraid of renewable energy. They're afraid of what's happening. If you look each year, the utility sells more and more power up until about 6 years ago. And then power demand started dropping. As more people put in energy efficiency and more people put in renewable energy, their sales started to drop. And they fear, and they've even told the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission that they may go out of business because of dropping sales from on-site renewable energy. So they see this plunge, and they say, what if we invested billions and billions and billions of dollars and we got the state to approve it? Then if the whole thing fails, we can still get our money from the state because they approved it, and we'll be rich. And so what happens to the people of the state is not really important. I mean, if you look at the 2008 Wall Street meltdown, what did PICO do when the Wall Street meltdown occurred? They gave their top executives short-term bonuses, long-term bonuses, pay hikes, and tried to cut the wage of their union employees. So they're a company that are aimed towards securing their own future, and they're not really concerned about what happens to us. So the problem is right now, and this gets back to the other geothermal problem, wind and solar both tend to fluctuate. Solar increases when the sun is shining, decreases when cloud cover comes. Wind can pump out full force, or it can decrease when the gusts die down. And therefore it fluctuates. It's called ramping, as the output goes up and down. And you need if you're going to rely on fossil fuels, you need a plant that can go up and down to offset the wind and solar going up and down, so you can supply constant demand to the customers. The problem is there are no geothermal plants in the world that fluctuate. It's claimed that El Salvador and the Philippines are experimenting with it, but nobody has any published work showing that geothermal can fluctuate. So if you put in a lot of geothermal, it doesn't help you with wind and solar on the grid. So the utility is proposing something called the smart grid. Smart grid means you're going to smart, and they're going to get rich. Smart grid means that right now they can measure the flow on their transmission lines, but they cannot tell what's going on their distribution lines to customers. So if you have a power outage, if your distribution line goes down, they have to wait for you to call up and say we don't have power, because they can't read the distribution line. So they want to be able to put telecommunications and computer systems on all of their distribution lines throughout the state, so that they can measure the flow on all the distribution lines, not only one way, but two ways. So they can read it, anticipate it, and even tell a distribution line whether you have to shut down for safety, or read the actual output of every solar system on every person's roof, be able to control electric water heaters in people's homes. They want a computer system that in real time gives them a total visual inspection of their entire grid and everything on the grid. And they want to secure it from hackers, because if somebody hacks the system, they could shut it down in a heartbeat. So they anticipate that will cost billions of dollars to implement. And the EPA has said that they have to upgrade their fossil fuel power plants, and that's another $500 million. And they have to upgrade their generators to be able to ramp, because they were built, a lot of them were built in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. They don't fluctuate to offset wind and solar. So they have to put another $2 billion into upgrading their generation and transmission grids. So as they put billions and billions in, what do you think is going to happen to the price of electricity? It's going to go that way. And right now, on Hawaii Island, the price of electric is cheaper for a solar installation with a battery than the PICO grid right now. As their prices go up and the price of solar is dropping through the floor, that's going to become more and more apparent, and more people are going to leave the grid. They are aware of that, and that's why they want to invest in all this infrastructure, so that they can get compensated over the years and don't have